So hello there. My name is Mandana Chaffa, and we are delighted that you're joining us today to celebrate My Shadow is My Skin, Voices from the Iranian Diaspora, edited by Catherine Whitney and Layla Emery, and published by the University of Texas Press in late March. Special thanks to Layla Razavi and Roya Farzars, who are overseeing the technology, and a request to all of you to please keep yourselves muted during the course of the event. I have the distinct honor of introducing our moderator, Anita Amirrezvani. Anita is a novelist, editor, and writing teacher.
Just lost sound.
Here we go. Sorry. Let me go back to that. Unfortunately, I was muted accidentally. So Anita is a novelist, editor, and writing teacher who was born in Tehran, Iran, and raised in San Francisco. Her first novel, The Blood of Flowers, has appeared in 31 languages and was longlisted for the 2008 Orange Prize for Fiction. Her second novel, Equal of the Sun, was published by Scribner in 2012 and has appeared in 10 languages. Tremors, new fiction by Iranian-American writers, an anthology she co-edited with Persis Karim, was released in 2013. Anita teaches in the writing programs at the California College of the Arts. Anita, mutshakkiram, and take it away.
Thank you, Mandana. So nice to see everybody here today on a Saturday afternoon and evening. So welcome. I'll be introducing our panelists shortly, and they'll be reading to you some excerpts from their essays published in My Shadow is My Skin. But just a brief housekeeping note first for our viewers and listeners. I want you to know that we're going to welcome your comments and questions, and that the chat function will be open after the readings and a few questions from me. So I'll let you know when the chat function is open and look forward to hearing from you, and we will get to as many of your questions and your comments as possible. Now, before I introduce the panelists, just want to say a few words to you about the anthology. And these really are words of celebration, and three main points here. The first thing is I want to salute and celebrate the editors of the anthology, Catherine Whitney and Layla Emery, for the 5 years of hard work that they put into producing the anthology. Those of you may know that an anthology is a labor of love. It is not about material gain. It comes out of a deep conviction that a community should be celebrated and that their stories need to be shared. So I want to thank the editors for all their hard work. I want to celebrate their accomplishment in bringing this beautiful book into the world. The second point I want to make about anthologies is that anthologies like this one are a celebration of community. The Iranian diaspora means that we are spread out all over the place. That is, of course, what happens in the diaspora. But in an anthology, the writers are brought together to share their stories and to establish us, our community, as another important ethnic group of writers writing in, about, and around the American context. So today, too, we celebrate our maturation as a community of writers, following in the path of many other groups before us, and claiming a space for ourselves and for our concerns in the diaspora. The last point of celebration I want to make is that this anthology is also a celebration of diversity. We Iranian Americans know of our different backgrounds and experiences. We are younger and older. We are born in Iran, born in the US, and born elsewhere. We are Farsi speaking, English speaking, or both, or neither, or more than that. We are male and female and non-binary. We come from different sexual persuasions. We come from different religions. We have one Iranian parent or two. We are married to Iranians or raising Iranian American children. We've been to Iran, or Iran exists only in our imagination. And we are all of combinations of these things. So I just want to point out that with us as a community, we celebrate a commonality of experience and background, but we also celebrate in this anthology our diversity, meaning the individuality of our experience. And that's the great thing about anthologies, is that you get this paradoxical combination of both diversity and commonality. So with that said, I want to introduce you to the diversity of our panelists. I'm going to read to you their bios, and panelists, as I read your bio, if you could please just wave or nod or otherwise indicate yourself so people can get to know you, our viewers can get to know you. I'll start it first with Poupeh Missaghi. Poupeh Missaghi is a writer, a translator both into and out of Persian, a Simtos Iran editor-at-large, and an educator. She holds a PhD in English and Creative Writing from the University of Denver, an MA in Creative Writing from Johns Hopkins University, and an MA in Translation Studies from Azad University of Tehran, Iran. Her nonfiction, fiction, and translations have appeared in numerous journals, and she has several books of translation published in Iran. Her debut novel, Trans-Relating House 1, was published by Coffee House Press in February 2020. She is currently a visiting assistant professor at the Department of Writing at the Pratt Institute in Brooklyn. Shireen Day is the daughter of an American mother and an Iranian father. Before the age of 18, she lived in New Jersey, the Caribbean, 1970s Tehran, and her mother's hometown of Des Moines, Iowa. When she finally left for Colorado College, she quickly fell in love with the Rocky Mountains and ultimately made Boulder, Colorado, her permanent home. Shireen is a retired psychotherapist. She enjoys traveling with her partner and with her children. Her writing has appeared in anthologies ranging from What Does It Mean to Be White in America, Breaking the White Code of Silence, to Random Acts of Kindness. Her essay, Delam Tang Shode, uses the frame of her father's death to explore the themes of home, family, and building an independent sense of self. Next, Omid Fallahazad is a bilingual fiction writer. His 2016 novel in Farsi, Qahware Div from Nakoja in Paris, centers on house burning riots against Baha'is in Shiraz on the eve of the 1979 revolution. His other works in Farsi include a collection of short stories, Se Tir Baran Dar Se Dastan from H&S Media in 2016, and a best-selling young adult novella, Razi, from Madrese in 2001. Most recently, he has published Vart Gez from Mehri Publications in 2019, a book of 3 dark humor tales dealing with the life of a middle-aged Armenian bachelor from Iran who lives in Watertown, Massachusetts. Omid's English language stories have appeared in publications such as Glimmer Train, Paul Revere's Horse, World Literature Today, and Tremors, new fiction by Iranian American writers. He lives near Boston, Massachusetts. Born in Tehran and raised in Brighton, England, and San Diego, California, Babak Elahi moved to Rochester, New York after college, where he and his wife, Jenny Spencer, raised 2 daughters and helped Jenny's family build a hydroponic greenhouse business. He completed a PhD in American literature at the University of Rochester in 2001 and taught English at Rochester Institute of Technology for 18 years, where he was Associate Dean of Liberal Arts for 6 of those years. He is now the head of the Department of Liberal Studies at Kettering University in Flint, Michigan. He has published mostly academic essays on American literature and Iranian diasporic writing and culture over the past 15 years. His book, The Fabric of American Literary Realism, was published by McFarland Press in 2009. Babak is also a musician, having played in a number of bands in Rochester. He also composed and performed music for an independent documentary film, The House of Stronzo from 2018, directed by Matt White. Mandana Chaffa is the founder and editor-in-chief of No Ruse Journal, a periodical of Persian arts and letters that will launch later this year. Her writing has appeared or is forthcoming in the Plowshares blog, Rain Taxi, The Rumpus, Split Lip Magazine, The Adroit Journal, Jacket 2, and elsewhere. She also conducts regular online poetry discussion groups for Penn's massive open online course, Modern and Contemporary American Poetry. Born in Tehran, Iran, she lives in New York City and is a graduate of the Wharton School of the University of Pennsylvania. So we're very pleased to have our panelists with us. And as I mentioned, we will now move into the reading section. We will start with Poupeh, who will read to you from her essay in My Shadow is My Skin. Poupeh, can you please go ahead?
Hi everyone, thanks for joining us. I actually have 2 essays in the collection, one under a pen name, and it was published a few years ago. So I'm gonna read a few paragraphs from both of those essays. So from the first one, hookah once upon a time. It is Saturday night in Rockville, Maryland at Z's place. Z sent an email a week ago inviting everyone for a night of wine, kebab, hookah, and poetry reading. The wood is burning in the fireplace. B is smoking a cigarette on the balcony. Z is making tea in the kitchen. M is in the kitchen too, busy preparing the hookah, putting in the tobacco, just brought by A's brother from Saudi Arabia. He was there on a business trip, bought in a local bazaar, mint flavored, not artificially, but with fresh mint leaves. The scent already fills the air in the kitchen. The charcoal is burning on the stove. B finishes his cigarette and walks in, closing the sliding door behind him. He turns to A and asks whether he remembers K. A says, of course, and takes a sip of his wine. We had such a great night together, unforgettable, that night we spent in the prison cell, my last summer in Tehran before I moved, A says. We were all at a party at H's, pretty drunk. Poor K, he was at another party and we called him, insisting that he join us. He said he might not come, and we said, no, you should. He came, and only 15 minutes after he arrived, the morality police came. They took us all, 10 guys and 8 girls. I have never laughed so hard in my whole life. We just took the party to the prison. We made jokes, we played games all night long. We recounted memories from childhood and school and girls. We made friends with the prison guard and sent him out to buy us cigarettes. The girls had not taken it so easily, we found out later on. Their cell had been on the other side of the hallway. They had become touchy and snappy. The female guards had not been nice to them. The blankets had not been clean enough. They were so mad at us when they saw us in a good mood in court the day after. What a night. And then just a few paragraphs from the second essay as well. This one's called Transmutations of Bilanguage. It was in your relationship with an American lover a few years ago that you came face to face for the first time ever with the failures of translation, migration on a deeply personal level. Once on a drive from Washington to Baltimore with him, the two of you listened for a while to the Iranian singer Gugush, and then for a while to Bruce Springsteen, switching back and forth. Listening to Gugush's songs, which you have grown up with since early childhood, you get goosebumps and he gets restless and irritated. You try to translate the words of her songs and the memories revived by them, and you fail. And even when you succeed, everything sounds stupid and banal, and you come to hate this partial sharing. You are not unfamiliar with Bruce Springsteen, but he does not touch you the way he does your lover. On that winding road connecting the two foreign cities, listening to the two singers' voices, you suddenly come to the realization that parts of you will forever remain untranslatable to this man from the other language, from the other country, both of which are nonetheless also yours, but forever only partially, and parts of him to you. Once he reprimands you for not wanting to accompany him to a stadium to watch a baseball game with him and his coworkers, for not being open enough to learn about his culture. You reply in anger that you're living his culture, every aspect of it, every day, every night, every damn second. And he has a choice for the what and when and how of his exposures and adoptions. It is in that lover's simultaneous desire for and impatience with your foreignness, and in your own desire for and resistance to his, that you realize that no matter what, your culture and your country will be the one always remaining in the margins, in the distance, an intellectual concept, a faraway reality, and that you will forever have a limit on how far you can or want to go into and settle in his. With your failure to navigate his personal in-between, you begin to fall into a deepening void. You try to force yourself to find home in this new land and language, but you keep failing. and the gap continues to grow inside you. I'm going to stop there.
Poupeh, thank you very much for reading to us from those. And yes, please do express your applause however you wish. This is a wonderful way that Babak just illustrated to us to emulate the situation of being together. So now we'll move to Omid. Omid, can you please read to us?
Can you hear me? Yes, I believe.
Yes.
Okay. Hi, I'm reading from Silk Screen, the piece that I have in the anthology, and just a one-line explanation that it's describing a short that's sent to this person as a gift from Iran, because some Iranian relatives still send shirts, shorts, or socks for their loved ones. So it was mostly a description of that. And this is the guy facing his wife, who wearing his shorts. She's wearing one of my company's giveaway blue t-shirts with a picture of a cable drum on it and my old baggy knee-length shorts. We tried to give away the shorts once, but I recovered them in the nick of time from the plastic bag, just before depositing it in the donation box. I feel embarrassed to wear them in front of others, unsure about what that says about me. Even if I am stepping outside to use the garbage chute, I pull a pair of jeans over those shorts. It isn't because of the cheap linen or the frumpy extra large cut. The American flag print makes me self-conscious. Rana's aunt, a charming stooped widow, sent me those shorts from Iran with a tiny box of saffron filaments and a beaded hand fan for her niece. Considering her meager pension and the pinch of humor in her choice of gift, the shorts are too dear to me to discard. But the proliferation of stars and stripes all over the crotch confounds me. I've always marveled at how naturally my Asian and Latino co-workers mount tiny American flags on the roofs of their cars or wear red, white, and blue nail polish for the 4th of July. But the cheap fabric of the shorts, the fake care tag with the blaring logo, and the incorrectly spelled freedom printed on the shorts, they all touch me. I imagine an underage, underpaid worker in a moldy screen print shop in Tehran's sprawling suburb, a boy who holds a squeegee larger than his hand, flashing toxic ink onto to-be-sewn garments, his squinting eyes detecting any bleeding of blue or red. The same hand could have been one of the thousands of raised fists floating over a sea of dead to America chants. His eyes could have been a pair of many gleaming eyes, reflecting the flames of a burning American flag when his entire school had been bused to attend the anniversary rally marking the capture of the hostages, aka the nest of spies. I'll go with you to the police, I say to Rana. I'm going to stop here. I don't know how many minutes I read, but this is an explanation that the story is about this situation that they have in their protest against the travel ban and their altercation with other groups who represent more religious groups of the protesters.
Thank you, Omid, and nice work, everybody, with your responses. I just want to mention about Omid's essay that she read you a short excerpt. It's a longer essay about the conflicts within the protests that's very interesting. So I hope you'll all have a chance to read it because he explores some really interesting issues in that essay, and hopefully we can get into more of them as we move into the question and answer session of our reading today. So thank you, Omid. We'll move on now to Shireen.
Hi, and thank you. My essay, Delem Tang Shode, literally means my heart is tight. More loosely, it translates to my heart is broken. I'm going to begin reading midway through the essay, and to help you connect with the scene, I want to give you a couple of markers. The year is 1972, and at this time, the Shah is still in power. I have been living with my mother in the Caribbean. As the scene opens, I'm an 11-year-old child traveling to Tehran for the first time with my dad, but I've had very little contact with him since I was 7 years old. His absence was part of the fallout of my parents' very bitter and litigious divorce. As we settled into our seats for the final 4 hours from Moscow to Tehran, I suddenly realized that I didn't know anything about where we were going. Where do you live? I asked. With my family. But who is that? It's your Uncle Nuri, my sisters, your cousins. They all love you very much. His deep brown eyes met mine as he spoke. He really wanted me to understand that I was loved, that they were waiting for me and had been waiting ever since I had disappeared into the Caribbean 4 years earlier. I felt dizzy. My stomach swirled, but I reminded myself I had made the decision to come to Iran. There was no turning back. I would have to adapt. Why do you live with all of those people? I asked. They're my family, he answered with a soft smile. They're your family too. He didn't understand that he was a stranger to me. He couldn't imagine the struggles I would face as I stumbled into the family diorama. I realize now that it would never have occurred to him to describe what lay ahead. He didn't understand that, unlike my cousins, I was used to making my own decisions. In that moment, I couldn't fathom living in a house with all of those people. He took a deep breath and turned to face me. His body blocked the aisle, and he looked deeply into my eyes and said, "Darling, you must forget about your mother and St. Thomas. You are starting a new life." I shook my head. I wondered if my mother even knew I was gone. St. Thomas was my home. I loved the sky, the sea, and the rocks. I loved the trade winds and the hibiscus. If I forgot everything bad, then I would lose everything I loved. The plane began its descent. I looked out the window. The jagged peaks of the Alborz Mountains cradled Tehran to the north. To the south was an expanse of desert. An endless swath of buildings bridged the two. The sky was a brilliant blue, not quite as beautiful as the Caribbean, but beautiful just the same, except there were very few trees. A small flame of hope flickered inside my heart. Maybe I'll be okay in this strange place. Mehrabad Airport was shouting, hugging, kissing, and hundreds of people milling around. But our arrival didn't prepare me for the drive to Sabah Street. Cars drove in clusters. Pedestrians stepped blindly forward into the maelstrom at intersections. Motorcyclists looking for a shortcut rode up the sidewalks. There was even an occasional donkey competing with the traffic. As we maneuvered through the city streets, I wondered if anything would ever feel familiar again. We pulled into the alley and walked to the massive door made of opaque textured glass, covered by an ornate brass grid. My father rang the bell. A small, short woman with a long gray ponytail opened it and immediately ushered us inside. I didn't know she was my father's eldest sibling, his sister, Gohar. As I stepped into the large empty hallway, she shut the door behind me, and I heard a strong tone of finality. My body stiffened, my eyes, always scanning for danger, narrowed against what I might find. Gohar's bright brown eyes crinkled when she smiled, highlighting the many deep wrinkles in her dark olive skin. Her knobby arthritic hands trembled and her voice shook as she reached for me and kissed me over and over. She pulled back for a moment and I saw tears running down her cheeks as she said, "Man Amijan, I am your aunt." She placed her hand on her heart. I held my breath. I braced against her tenderness. To be handled in such a familiar way by an elderly woman who spoke no English frightened me. Her touch was soft and loving, but it felt so foreign. "Who is this?" I asked my father. Smiling broadly, he said, "This is my sister, Gohar." Gohar means the oldest one. She raised us, my brothers and sisters and me. She's like my mother. She loves you like you are her daughter. My chest hardened and I clenched my fists. I don't want another mother. Cheshme man rashane ke amadi, she said, pointing at her eyes. My eyes are shining because you have come. Farsi khube, Farsi yad begir. Farsi is good, learn Farsi. Suddenly another of my father's sisters appeared in that giant hallway. She also grabbed me and hugged me and kissed me. I had met her once when she visited New York, but she seemed different now, foreign. I didn't know what anyone was saying. It had never occurred to me I was going someplace where they didn't speak English. All of my cousins in New York spoke English. I bit my lip, trying to hold back my tears. I would eventually learn that the translation of Amejan to aunt or dear aunt didn't do the word justice, especially when it applied to Gohar. Having no children of her own, Gohar loved all of us with a ferocity and a selflessness that I have never experienced in another human being. She was just 13 when her own mother died. Her love for the younger siblings she raised and their children is where she found her identity. She believed in simple pleasures. She couldn't read or write. She enjoyed TV, a delicious meal, the occasional cigarette, good health, and most importantly, she enjoyed family. Every day she took me aside and said, Hame khube, everyone is good. Then she listed off the names of everyone, including my mother. As I stood in the entryway to my new home, I didn't know that everything revolved around the family, and the family would help you survive, but that in turn you were obligated to let your elders direct your life. I didn't know that a cousin made your clothes, a brother or sister helped raise your child. I didn't know that these were the unquestioned facts in my Persian family. I didn't know there was a sense of order, of duty without resentment. My father wouldn't have thought to tell me these things. And he didn't know that I had stopped thinking of myself as a child. He didn't know I had become someone who questioned everything. He didn't know that my mother had schooled me in her philosophy. Never trust your family. Thank you.
Thank you, Shireen. Now we'll move on next to Babak.
Thank you, Anita, and thanks everyone, fellow readers. Love your work. I have a couple of pages I'm going to read, and I think you'll get your bearings in the story. And if you need some explanation, I'll give it afterwards. May 21, 2014. 2 taxis take us all to Behesh Zahra Cemetery, well south of Tehran, a long journey on a hot day. Shortly after we pass the massive construction site for Khomeini's shrine, we reach the cemetery, a clean, well-organized, sprawling place. The deceased are taken into a central hall where wide screens display their names, indicating that their bodies can now be taken in and prepared for burial. In the center of an expansive atrium sits a person-sized vase filled with rose petals. Next to it stand uniformed men. I look at the screen, waiting for her name, Farah al-Muluk Arbab Amin. Bibi Gul and another female friend of the family go back to wash my mother's body as part of the ritual. Soon my mother's shrouded form emerges from a low communicating window. Her body is placed on a plastic stretcher, and we carry her to an altar where a mullah recites from the Quran. We mourners repeat Arabic phrases from the recitation. We lift her again and take her to a van. The cemetery stretches to the horizon, and the body must be taken a few kilometers out. We follow in taxis. The ritual calls for the eldest son to enter the grave, receive the body, and lay his mother on her side to face the Qibla, the direction of Mecca, as if the dead are perpetually praying. Farhad climbs down into the grave, and the pallbearers, all men, hand my mother's shrouded form down to him. Avoiding contact with her body, Farhad's face is a frozen mask. Later, he will tell me, it was only when I was down there that I felt any peace through the whole damn thing. During this process, a second mullah begins reciting, this time through a loudspeaker saturated with reverb, his voice echoing through the sun-drenched heat of concrete, dirt, and squat trees. My mother is buried not far from her older sister, Aziz of the Rose Petals. She raised my mother and Shamsi after their mother died. Also buried nearby is my uncle, Shamsi's husband, whom she called simply Doctor, as if that were his only name. Bibi Gul and Shamsi sprinkle rose water around the grave. We all throw petals into and around the grave from the massive bouquets we have brought. I walk away from the gravesite to a narrow path nearby, shaded by trees just big enough to provide cover from the sun. I walk toward a bench. I sit desolated. In the May 23rd, 2014, in the period between the burial and the hafteh, time opens up. Farhad and I take a long walk up to the mountains just north of Niavaran. We talk about the past, about regrets, about brokenness. I apologize for my harangue about the Patient's Bill of Rights. He says he's glad we had the argument. It was necessary. The air has turned clearer than it's been for days, and we can't help ascribing a magical cause to the change in the weather, something about our mother's spirit. May 25th, 2014. On what would have been my mother's 84th birthday, we again hire 2 taxis and drive to Behesht Zahra. The wide boulevard leading to the cemetery is lined with florists and stone carvers. Business has been good for decades. We spend another afternoon at the gravesite. Bibi Gul brings out plastic bottles of rose water, which we pour liberally over the grave. May 26, 2014. I grieve for Shamsi the most. I sit on my mother's bed in the room they shared, and she tells me she was my everything, my friend, my sister, my mother, my daughter. Their mother died young, and neither of them had a daughter, so I see the logic of the mother and daughter kinship loop. What will I do without her, she asks. Each bed is flanked by a nightstand with pictures of their children and grandchildren and Omid and Pari. I try to imagine how she will spend the coming nights now without my mother to talk to at bedtime and morning. She tells me again she has lost everything, catching her breath as the tears come. May 28th, 2014. The day before my flight, our neighbor, Mamad Tari, walks across from his realty office and calls Farhad and me down to help him. He wants to gather mulberries. Sunshine seems to glow through the green-white translucence of the fruit on the tree in front of our house. Bibi Gul brings out a large sheet with a simple floral print. Parisa, Omid, and I hold the sheet open as Mamad Tari and Farhad shake the tree's trunk, rattling its limbs. The mulberries rain down, making muffled plops on the light cotton. Shivering leaves, bright clear sun, crisp air, soft fabric, laughter of man, woman, and child. Here, on a short street off Niavaran Avenue, in the middle of the road, I catch mulberries in a sheet. The touch of the cloth links me to Pari and Omid. The air and sun connect me to Bibi Gul, Farhad, and Mamad Tari. We gather fruit and we place some in a bowl on the kitchen counter. Mulberry in Persian is the simplest button of a word, tut. Maybe this is why I have come back to Iran after 40 years. Not to bury my mother, not to kiss her goodbye, not to console my aunt and my brother, but to reap this crop, to shake this tree.
Thank you very much, Babak. And now we'll move on to our final reader before our questions. So Mandana, can you please take it away?
Terrific. Thank you so much. It's such an honor to be here and to read with such incredibly soulful and talented people who feel like brothers and sisters to me now. This is pretty self-explanatory. I'm going to read 2 excerpts from my essay. I remember sleeping on a fur coat in a cloakroom. I remember a roulette wheel spinning, 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 but maybe I imagined that. I remember the restaurant on the bridge. I remember Baba bringing home scarce bananas because I love them so. I remember Maman and Baba listening to the cassette player in the living room, drinking and laughing while I danced for them. I remember in exact detail the layout of our apartment. I remember being sick and standing in my crib until Maman came to get me. I remember Baba blowing cigarette smoke in my ear because it ached. I remember being forced to lie still for the mask that smothered my face before they removed my tonsils. I remember being held close on Baba's lap, unseatbelted yet perfectly protected as he drove with one hand. I remember sitting on the kitchen counter while Maman ground beef for côtelette. I remember the nimbus of half asleep in the car, listening to muted mahasti and the muted lullaby of my parents talking as young couples do. I don't remember Esfahan, Shemron, Shiraz, Ramsar. I don't remember my mother's mother. I don't remember the smell of fresh nona sangak straight from the baker's oven. I don't remember so many precious experiences except through the filters of others' memories. I am my own unreliable narrator. I remember the day we left on a visit that turned into a stay that turned into a lifetime. I remember the pound of Swiss chocolates I ate as we went from plane to plane to plane. I remember the terrifying clamor of JFK. I remember holding hands very tightly. I remember meeting strangers who were family. I remember being silent, bereft of language. I remember the end. I remember the beginning. I am 5. I am further in 5. It is September 13th, 1971. It is the first day of school, and I am accidentally in the first grade, unexpectedly in the United States, unprepared for what may come. All I know is I am 5. It is the most you can count on one hand. Yek, do, se, chahar, panj. I am alone in a room full of children who are all bigger than I am, moving in fast orbits around a center to which I am not affixed. A maypole of 6-year-olds, diving, leaping, laughing, and connecting, while I stand ribbonless and unsheathed nerve. I have not yet learned to conceal the quiver that will give me away, like that of the young gazelle on the Serengeti on Mutual of Omaha's Wild Kingdom, where Marlon Perkins waits safely in a hut with a Mai Tai, right before the wonderful world of Disney on Channel 4 every Sunday night, on the television with rabbit ear antennas. But I don't know Disney yet. I don't know of any Magic Kingdom, and it is not a small world after all. I'm in a classroom, but I don't have a word for classroom. I don't have a concept of classroom. I am from the old world, tentatively in the new world, but not in a Christopher Columbus kind of way, more Shanghai than settler. I am just 5. I do not speak English. Around me, they babble, they are loud, they expend energy, and I curl up like a baby hedgehog and retreat further into myself. It is September 13th, and somewhere not too far away, someone is yelling, Attica, Attica, and me, I am encaged in a scarred wooden seat and table contraption in the back of the classroom, lost. Lost is not knowing. Lost is having no imperfectly folded Rand McNally map as guidance. Lost is seeing no reflection in a room of blondes, blue eyes, clotted cream skin. Even the brunettes look different from me. It is the time of Marsha Brady, and I am not, nor will I ever be, cool, hip, far out, groovy. You live in a dual existence of an irrevocably transformed former country, crystallized in your mind after 1916 days, kept alive by the umbilical cord of familial rituals. Alongside this melting pot that you have adopted and that has transformed you in turn. You want to ask Einstein, is it possible to have a parallel existence in a different present? Have you left enough of your DNA there, 1916 days of it, so that it lives on, walking through streets you will never see as an adult, eating pale orange cantaloupe that intoxicates with its perfume before it reaches your mouth, feeling both insignificant and eternal at Takhta Jamshid, and scribbling your stories in the garden shrines of the great masters? And what of your shadowy existence that stayed behind? Does she yearn to be where you are? Do you and your spiritual womb-mate meet in dreams in a chai khane with your mother's brewed tea in warmed, delicate curved kamarbadi glasses and the smell of cardamom cookies in the air? Or in a cloned Starbucks, a sleeved, disposable white and green cup in hand while Macs tap disjointedly around you. You talk through a veil that obscures yet romanticizes and dream of a taste of the other's life, not bifurcated by a foot in two worlds. What language will you speak? What will you say to one another that you can't express to any other living soul? Who else can understand the complicated topography of your unmapped road? Though your life is an ode to words, to connection, you live in the shadowed hollows in the without country, lacking satellite guidance, no Sacagawea at your side. You carry your tangled roots with you in a backpack that both weighs you down and gives you wings. Thank you.
Thank you very much to all of our panelists. And I want to add one final point of celebration here, which is celebrating their beautiful words and the many, many years that writers take to mature into writers who produce such beautiful and publishable work. So I also want to reflect those many years that you just heard, that those many years of effort and the beautiful results that they've gotten as a result of all their hard work. So thank you to all 5 panelists. Now I want to open up to some questions I'm going to pose to the panelists, and after that we will get your chats and your questions, viewers and listeners. But first I'd like to ask the whole panel, because I think this comes through in all of your work, if you could please address the issue of both belonging and not belonging and how it influences your work. Because I think it's really a common theme, and I can tell you certainly for myself, I could speak about that at length as well. So let me throw that open to you and ask if somebody would like to get us started.
I'll jump in.
Thanks, Babak. Please go ahead.
I think for me, the fact that I got graduate degrees in American literature and write about American literature, I suppose that was a way of trying to belong. And I don't know if, I mean, it's not in this story, but growing up in Southern California, I felt that, you know, being in my adolescence during the Iranian Revolution and facing the kinds of, you know, direct racist, you know, attacks at the time, the question was important: how do I belong to this country, as well as how do I belong in my house with my family speaking Persian? And I think one of the ways I felt I belonged was to find those other marginalized groups, and I became very deeply involved in the Chicano literature of the time in terms of, you know, as an undergrad, and finding friends sort of outside of that mainstream. And then going back after 40 years, I felt like I had become so much a part of an American culture, which I, you know, obviously defined in a multicultural way. It felt odd going back, and one of the main things that made me feel like I was on sort of the border between belonging and not belonging is going to the bazaar, and my accent in Persian isn't too bad, but my vocabulary isn't great. So after a few words, people would realize, you know, they'd say, "Hey, say hello to the Americans when you go back." So, you know, I don't think I'll ever solve that. But I think at different times, you accept a home for that time period, and then it changes, and there's constant change, but you remember that you will make a home for yourself. I don't know.
Yeah, I think for me, and this influences what I write about as well as the kinds of books I read, very similarly to what Babak just said, is that I've ultimately defined belonging as being with the people that I love. And sometimes that means with people that I'm actually physically in the same area with, like my partner or my children. but also with my family, and particularly with my Persian family. Having an American parent and an Iranian parent, and the disaster of their divorce and the ways that it affected me, I really became part of my Persian family. And my kids are part of my Persian family, even though they're technically only a quarter Persian. I mean, that legacy and that heritage just scooped us all up. And whether you want to be part of it or not, the culture comes in. And yet, I know I have very clear memories of being in Iran when I was, 15, and in a taxi by myself or with friends, and talking to the driver, and the driver saying, "For an American, you speak such great Farsi," and then it would come out perhaps that I actually had a Persian father. And then, as is wont to happen in Iran, the driver would scold me for speaking such terrible Farsi. So this belonging theme touches me everywhere I go. And I think that's part of why I love living in Colorado, is people don't lead with ethnicity here. So I've been able to blend in a way that might not have happened in another part of the country. So.
Omid, would you like to jump in? Because your story in some ways is more of a migration, I think, from Iran to the United States, right? As an adult?
Yes, I think I clearly see the distinction between those of us who experienced this as a child, meaning leaving childhood behind in Iran and coming here as a child and growing up into this process of finding a way either to, somehow resolve this or still live with the consequences of any issues that comes with it, compared to those who come as an adult and somewhat dealing with traumas or demons that first belonging, imposed on them and then forced them to actually leave. There are people who leaving Iran with all the complicated emotional situation with the country, with their culture, at the same time feeling awfully abused and traumatized by the political situation, which makes their experience here more focused on how to first clear the space in the head, then just decide about how American I want to be and what it means to be an American or Iranian American. But my writing is mostly, deals with this, I feel, painful struggle that cannot easily forget or erase what they've been witnessed in Iran, but at the same time, they find necessarily relief or meaning in completely being adopted by the American culture or identity or politics. And I think writing about it or reading about it or talking about it is probably the first phase or stage for someone like me or people like me. I don't know what would be next, but I feel that it's very necessary to be open about all those emotional turmoil.
Thank you, Omid. Mandana, would you like to jump in?
Listening to all of you, I've kind of changed what I was thinking about. I realize that how American or Iranian I feel is a shifting ground, not only in different parts of my life, but even in a given time in my life. Certainly in the beginning, I was trying to learn English and go to school, but my parents were, they gave me a great gift by having me learn the language and have it, the language and the culture be a primary part of my life, even while I was at school becoming more American, as it were. I do find that, interestingly enough, I am always comfortable with any immigrant from any culture. So in a sense, belonging is not just about belonging with the Iranian culture, which is so diverse itself, but it's also about all immigrants. I feel like we share a common language, and we have similar things that we think about and concern ourselves about. I am not one or the other. I am both. And finally, I think age does this for you. I'm at the point in my life where I'm comfortable kind of going from one to the other. But I'm definitely, the older I get, the more Iranian I feel than when I was younger, which is probably not what you might expect after almost 50 years of being in this country. But the older I get, the more I turn to our music, and certainly with my parents, I speak Persian and all. So it's a ground that keeps shifting. I wonder what I would say to you a year from now if you asked me the same questions, but that's where I am today.
Thank you. And we'll go to Poupeh.
It's interesting, like listening to all of you, I can get like glimpses of also my own experience. Like when Babak spoke about his experience of like going into American literature, I think for me, that space of belonging exists in English language, not necessarily like culturally or to other aspects of the country, but like the language itself gives me such a home that I can just like settle in. And it was also interesting, like Shireen mentioned, like finding a home in Colorado. Like I lived in Denver for 5-6 years, and I loved like the beauty and nature of the place, but like I couldn't connect with the people, and I couldn't wait to get out. And it's very strange, like how place speaks to different people differently. And I think like after all these years, like moving around in the US, it was only when I moved to New York and was surrounded by people who, most of whom didn't belong or didn't feel that they belonged, I felt like, okay, now I can settle here. Now I can breathe here, because it didn't matter that I should feel belonging, but rather it was like in the not belonging that I started to feel that I could belong. Like that pressure of like, I need to find myself part of this community. When that was lifted, I could feel like I can be part of this place. Yeah.
It's a complex issue, and I want to thank everybody on the panel for commenting on it. At this point, because our time is flying, I also want to ask Leila to please open the chat function. And listeners and viewers, please do type in your comments or questions for the panelists, and we will get to as many of those as we possibly can. While you're doing that, I'm going to pose a second question to any member of the panel that wants to talk about it. This is a question about writing. A lot of the people who are listening to you today will be interested in you as writers. And all of you have chosen to write in the personal essay format, which means exposing a fair amount about yourself and really plumbing your own depths, or getting into your own depths and writing about them. So I wanted to ask you to comment on that, on if there are things you feel very comfortable revealing things about yourself in the personal essay. There are things that you hold back from or feel that are secrets you cannot share. How do you walk that line of self-revelation in the personal essay?
I think when I first started writing, the advice I was given was to write fearlessly and edit carefully. And I have followed that throughout the time that I've been particularly working with personal essay, because mine is pretty personal. And so it's been something that I have worked with a lot, of what am I comfortable saying, and who is still alive or not alive in my family that I would hurt by sharing whatever it is I've shared. So I've had to wait a while before I could publish as well. So.
Omid, can I bring you into this discussion as well? Because your essay, I think, addresses different points of view between you and Rana, I believe, in terms of the issue of political protest and how to handle it both here in the States and in Iran. Would you like to address that, the issue of revelation in the personal essay?
Well, yes, I mean, generally, I believe, personal to say, any other form of writing, I mean, the writers sacrifice anything if they think they can get some impact out of the writing, what they reveal. So even personal secrets, if you write it and they listen to or they read it and they get the impact, you go for, I think I go for it. I don't hold back. In that, the story, it's a little bit difficult story because as you said, multiple angles of working with the situation, which is true. I mean, this came out of the personal interaction and conversation with someone who went to the rally, March 2016, maybe the women rally in Washington, D.C., if I'm not wrong. I don't remember the exact date. But the feeling that they had, the difficult time that they had, that the way the face of the protest was pictured by the American, maybe Muslim American, wearing American flag and thinking that, well, I'm against this, but I'm not for the hijab. Hijab is a bad thing when I see that as a symbol of my protest. So, so everything that came out, it's very, I think, risky and dangerous for anyone in this story and for the writers as well, to feel that things that they say can be taken advantage of in any political platform in a different way without their intention. So our personal essay writings are the same. And even I think Layla and Catherine, when they putting this together, probably they were feeling, what next? I mean, you present or give a stage to Iranian American diaspora, and but who's gonna maybe exploit this? Who's gonna take advantage of this one way or another politically? So as you said, in the writing, this is also the same, but the other side of you, the writer side of you, said, you think, if I'm revealing this feeling, this idea, this conflict in myself, if dramatically, if impacts my reader, if they get it, if they talk to it, speak to it, you go for it. Probably you don't hold back. So it's a constant, I think, again, the struggle inside you, that politically everything can be taken out of context, but at the same time, dramatically you think, I'm gonna put this down because I feel this is gonna work.
Okay, thank you. I'll move on to a question that's come up in the chat. This is from Persis Karim. She asks Poupeh and Omid, since you both are also comfortable writing in Persian, how do you feel that writing in English enables you to say or write things that are more challenging in Persian? Or is the opposite true? Do you feel there are limitations in writing in English for you?
I can start on that one. I actually have a very interesting relationship with Persian. I translate into Persian, but I don't really write that much in Persian. So it feels like the creative element for me exists more in English, or also the exploration. I do that more in English language. And part of it, I think, comes from, there are several layers to that. I feel I was more systematically educated in English, and I always wrote in English as a way to learn the language. So it became so much second nature for me, in order, reading, writing English. And in Persian, it was more you did all these other studies in Persian, or you didn't have to write essays, you didn't have to write film reviews, you didn't have to write summaries of books. So I think part of it was practical. But the other aspect of it was I felt overwhelmed in Persian by the literature that existed, by the writers who wrote in Persian. But in English, it was for me this is my second language. I'm not really being judged by the quality of the work that I'm producing. And as a result, it just felt like a playground for me. And I just did whatever I wanted. And I felt like whatever I'm doing today is better than 6 months ago, than 2 years ago. So that just gave me the ability to do more with English than I ever dared to do in Persian. So I guess in that sense, like I feel more limitations in Persian than in English, even though I studied and lived a large part of my life in Iran. And I think with translation, it's because there's always like the creative aspect exists. There is somebody else's words and you have a constraint that you're working with that helps you then go into that language. But not with my own writing, that doesn't exist. I write from time to time, like journalistic essays, but they don't need as much creativity or psychological exploration or personal digging. So I think like it's more of a distant space than what I'm able to do in English, or what I allow myself to do in English.
And before Omid answers, I'll add, there's a follow-on to that question from Farnaz, and she says, to add to Persis's question, does writing in one language or another help you say things that you wouldn't say in the other? So we'll start with Omid.
Well, I like to keep it short because I think we can talk about that for hours from my own experience. But I feel it's like at this point, I feel I'm very committed to writing in English. I'm disciplined. I discipline myself to work on my English and do English writing. It's like I'm married to English, but sometimes I have regular affairs with the Farsi. I go back seasonal cases that I like. I have a story of which I think I can make it to 100 pages in Farsi, and it's just biting at me, thinking you should do this summer. Whereas I'm into my English writing at this point. I'm writing my English pieces and trying to figure out how to get them published. But the Farsi thing, it's there. It's just over my shoulder right here. It says, waits for a moment to jump in and say, what about this story? Because I kind of have a established Farsi readership. So that flows very naturally. If I have the idea and time, I like to put it together and get it out of the way. With English, it's just, I have to look at the horizon and see what's possible, what comes together. In terms of what you can say, it's, as I said, I think it will take a longer time to explain about that. It makes a difference, yes. And it's more about readership than the actual language for me. What I can say in this language or that language, what I can convey here or there, if there's any ear for that, to hear it or to read it.
Thank you. Here's a comment and a question from Susan Trocolo for everybody on the panel. She writes, I love the sharing of your stories. They are heartfelt and approach the essence of each one of you as individual Iranian Americans. In reflecting on the experience of the immigrant, I think of the fear that greets anyone who is different. Becoming seems to be the transition from fear to acceptance, to and from the immigrant and the native. My question, do you think that your own comfort came when you felt you were, quote unquote, Americanized, or when you were comfortable in your own being? Again, I love the opportunity to hear, see, and smell the Iranian culture through your beautiful words. So do you think that your own comfort came when you felt you were Americanized, or when you were comfortable in your own being? Panelists, what do you think?
I don't know if I am comfortable still. And I think partly that, my interest in American literature is always almost oppositional. Like, I want to find those ruptures in the literature. I want to find those places where the things break down and conflict arises. And so I think in my sense of comfort, I feel doubly or triply exiled from Iran, because you know, we left Iran. There was a thick and rich Iranian American community in San Diego. Then I left there to go to Rochester, where I've lived in Rochester longer than I've lived anywhere else in my life. And that, to a certain extent, feels like home, but only because, you know, my daughters were born there. I have, you know, I guess it's multiple sets of roots. And I think to bring this back around to the writing, because I feel like I left out some point in the belonging question about writing, and I think Poupeh's response about language really helped me think about this, which is that language is an important part of it. And also, in writing my piece for this anthology, most of my writing has been literary criticism, cultural studies, so I have not done much creative writing. And I felt a real responsibility to my or the potential readers of this anthology. And in recent years, this experience has been one of the most important things for me to feel a sense of belonging, if you will, because I felt responsible, not just about the people I was writing about, my mother, my brother, my family, but also a kind of responsibility for those who I imagined would be reading this, including people I know and people I imagined would read it. And I just wanted to do justice to that relationship, I guess, for what it's worth.
Thank you. Other panelists, do you want to weigh in on the issue of your comfort coming from when you felt you were Americanized, or when you felt you were comfortable in your own being?
For me, it's more about being comfortable in my own being, because from day to day, I wouldn't tell you that I am Americanized, other than the fact that America encompasses every walk of life. So to that extent, sure, I would say I'm Americanized, but I wouldn't, I'm never going to be completely Iranian, and I'm never going to be completely American. And add to that, I think Babak kind of hinted around this. I left there maybe 50 years ago. I'm of a certain age. Someone else who might have left there at 5, but they left there 10 years ago, is going to have a very different experience and personality than I am, because we're also impacted by where we are temporally and how we've grown up and what's been going on. And I think that makes an enormous difference. But I would think that just about, I have a feeling most people would say they're not sure that what they exactly are, although that might be my particular bias. I used to think that that was a bit of a curse when I was growing up. It would have been really lovely to look like everyone else and not always be asked, what are you? Because in my case, always, in my corporate life, educationally, you always get asked, what are you? Because I'm clearly not whatever the standard is. But right now it feels like a secret weapon, because if you can fit in everywhere, then everywhere can be your home. Whereas before it felt like it closed me off. Now I feel that it's all opportunity. It's limitless where I can belong, as long as it's a community that wants me to belong there.
Mandana, can I ask something of you? Sure. I really like the references to American pop culture in your piece, and the way you play around with that. And to what extent was that part of both belonging, not belonging, comfort?
Oh boy, that's a great question. Yes and no. So here's the interesting thing. Yes, pop culture via television, obviously that had an impact. I also have American cousins. So when we came, there was family that was already here, and they were kind of my entree into the world, and they were my guides and protected me. Having said that, though, I had a very Iranian upbringing. I don't really know American lullabies. I wouldn't, you know, all those little things that the kids knew when I was in school and I entered first grade, I was totally clueless. Not only didn't I know the language, but none of the customs. And my parents were very traditional Iranian parents when we came here, and with all that entails. And so I really did I was probably a lot more Iranian then, and kids being who they are, I definitely didn't belong in that culture. Does that answer the question, Babak?
Yes.
Another question that's come in, this is from Alexandra Davis for all of the panelists. She says, given the personal nature of your essays and the perspectives you each bring writing from childhood or in adulthood, how do you feel you relate in context to the title of the essay, My Shadow is My Skin?
I can speak to that a bit. Like in the sense of, I feel like the experience of immigration or existing in two different languages, you always feel a shadow is following you, and it's following you so closely that it just feels as if like it's part of your own body. It feels like your skin. So in that sense, it's like you exist in multiplicities, you exist in different versions of yourself in different situations, which is perhaps true for everyone, but is much more exaggerated for people who, like us, have experienced different places, different cultures, different languages. So I think it's just that closeness that you feel where like any moment there's like another ghost of you exists with you.
Yeah, I would really second what Poupeh is saying, that even with the questions we've talked about today, I could answer them from a different perspective based on a different time in my life, or even as Mandana was saying, that just maybe a year from now, I'd have a completely different answer, because so many of these things are evolving. But I love the title of this book. To me, it captures the essence of, well, what is my shadow, and what do I show? What do I not show? What do I keep secret? What's exposed? And can anyone see it anyway? I mean, you know, that sometimes when you're in a different place, no one even notices that you're different, or maybe they do, but you don't know they notice it. So I mean, I think there couldn't have been a better title for this book.
Another question from your listeners and viewers. This is from Amir. He writes, I so loved hearing these personal essays. I'm curious to know from the panelists, how do you balance the performative part, centering the reader and considering how to make your experience legible to others, and the introspective part, centering yourself, feeling genuine to your life story of your writing process?
If I can take a stab at that. So how something sounds is very important to me. And it doesn't feel done unless I can read it out loud and feel the rhythms. Now, anyone else could read it very differently than I would, but there's a certain rhythm in my own head when I'm writing. So if you're going to call that the performative part, I would say that has a lot to do, but also that's part of the culture. I mean, I grew up with, you know, a grandmother who didn't know how to read and write, but could recite poetry because it's part of the culture. It's the performative part of, you know, how they recite. The recitations are a very specifically stylized way. And I think if you hear anything all the time when you're young, it becomes part of the way your brain works. So for me, having had a lot of that in my youth and hearing a lot of Persian music and all, I think that whether or not I want it, my writing is colored by that. Perhaps it's too flowery at times, but it is definitely colored by that. I don't think I can ever get rid of it, except when I'm doing corporate writing, in which case it's very dry and boring.
Anyone else want to comment on
Well,
the?
I just want to say something again, because of the wide range of experiences and how we get to become American or Americanized. For someone like me, I left Iran, you go to Turkey, go to Ankara, you apply for refugee status, and then you go through all that process. And one of the things that takes place that was very dramatic for me, I never expected that, there's a moment that eventually you go and you sit down with someone in a small room and they ask you, okay, what's your case? and you prepare for that. When you're waiting with other refugees, that's the constant conversation. People think you can be rejected. I mean, there are so many cases that it's guaranteed that no one gets the rejection, but the performance there, or preparing it for that performance moment, and it's just happening right there. So writing these personal essays, to me, for some of us, if we've been through that, it's just a reflection of our real situation of thinking about our past and history as a key, as a way to open a door to our future. And our future, again, now it's connected with so many other people with different stories. But we have to deal with those two parts. We have to think of how much of my past do I need to reveal and present, in what method and manner, to get the idea across so they understand either my pain, my hopes, my fears, and so forth. So it's somehow, I think for some of us, is our identity, actually.
I would also add, for me, that performance happens also in writing in different genres. I don't just write nonfiction and essays. I write also in hybrid modes. So I do like fiction, I do like criticism in creative formats. So I think like that performance and that choice between how this balance between connection to readership and my interior world, that decision depends, like based on how I feel that balance exists, I would choose different genres, and for different genres also different languages, in order to be able to perform and reach my readers.
Thank you, panelists. I want to move on to a question from Dana. Dana asks, how did you choose what to write for this anthology? And before you answer, I just want to point out to everyone who's listening and watching that our editors, Catherine Whitney and Layla Emery, the editors of the book, are also with us. And so if Layla and Catherine would like to jump in as well, in any way on the subject of what they wrote for the anthology, then we'd also love to hear from them. Okay, but for now, I'm going to turn it over to the panelists and ask you to comment on how did you choose what you wrote for the anthology? So Babak, can I start with you?
Sure. It was kind of a perfect storm of what was happening in my life and this opportunity coming up, and I just felt like I had to say something for my mother, not just about her, and that and as someone who had not been back to Iran for 40 years and went back, I thought that that's something that ought to be told in some way. So it was the choice of what to write about was easy. For me, I think how to write about it was a little more difficult, because anyone, even the most perfect family situation, you delve into family and you dredge up things that, you'd rather not share. And I tried to reveal some of that, but, I wanted to also honor my family members and not, I don't know, that part of it was tricky. And so the choice was easy, but how to write about it brought up some challenges that I knew I would have to deal with, and they were quite challenging.
Thank you, Babak. And other panelists, this issue of how you chose what to write for the anthology.
I can say a word. The hookah essay, I actually had written it a while before the call for submissions came. But I never felt like I could send it out anywhere that felt right. And when I submitted it, I was also not sure if, because the form itself is not a very traditional essay, so I was kind of like, not sure, but I was like, okay, I'm just gonna send it and see what happens. But interestingly, with the second essay, Transmutations by Language, it was Layla and Catherine who found me, even though it was written under a pen name. I don't remember how they connected the dots and found out that it was me. But it was very interesting. It made me realize like there is also like, by that time I felt like there is this language that I'm using that even in different pieces, it still travels with me from one subject to another and from one piece to another. So my experience like with that was very interesting. Like it felt like this readership that I never that I never expected has found me and come back to me, which was very heartwarming.
We have a question from Alejandro Saravia. He asks, what's the difference between a personal essay and a testimonial literature?
If anyone else wants to jump in, I can just say out. But because I write also witness literature, they don't necessarily always are the same. Like you can write testimonial literature, but it's not necessarily personal essay. Like you can use documentation and other people's experiences to testify to some historical experiences that are not necessarily yours. Which I think like in that case, it's very important to be transparent and speak about your own role also and your own relationship to that experience, but it doesn't necessarily mean like it has to be a personal essay. Sometimes a personal essay is also testimony, but it's not always one and the same.
Thank you, Poupeh. We only have a few minutes left, but I do have a question for the panelists that hasn't really come up, and that's the issue of the really highly charged, difficult relationship between the US and Iran that's existed for more than 40 years. And the context I want to ask you about is how that has affected your work as a writer. And obviously the relationship has, you know, become even more difficult lately because of events that you all know. But for sure, I know it's influenced you probably in many ways. So would anyone on the panel care to comment on that?
I think one of the things that inspired me to start writing about my story was that it gives a different view into the stereotype of that. I mean, initially I wanted to write, I was still angry with my mother when I first started writing and have made a lot of peace with her through the writing, but it was, you know, not that the Americans are good and the Iranians are bad, but it was like in my case, if you were going to stereotype, the Americans really didn't live up to what was required of them in my family history, which was part of what inspired me to kind of start writing in the first place. And the ongoing conflict makes me ill a lot of the time between the two countries and makes it hard to decide. I keep thinking I would like to write about my parents' marriage as a metaphor for what these two countries are doing to each other, because it's so fraught in so many ways, but I haven't quite untangled all of that yet, and I may not want to. So that would be my take.
Anybody else? Mandana, you look like you're thinking about this one.
Well, I'm trying to think of how to answer it. You can't help but be impacted by that. Do you know, I would think that any culture that has had challenges with the United States, but they live here and consider themselves American, have the same issues. Early on, I think I spent a lot more time, especially when I was younger, and it was very hard to be Iranian during the hostage crisis, trying to separate what it is to be from a culture versus to agree with the government of that culture. And I find I do that now with respect to being American sometimes when people I know from other countries are like, well, you know, what is going on with your country? And I'm trying to separate the fact that, yes, there's the American culture and then there's the American government. And I don't know if that's the right thing to do or not, because the government does matter. However, at the end of the day, I think we become a citizen of the country that we create for ourselves. And to constantly be thinking about the politics is a really big challenge, and it keeps you from connecting. Do you know? And I always think that when you connect with people, something like this, where maybe some people don't know a lot about the Iranian culture and may recognize some things about themselves in some of us, I think those connections are the most important things when you're looking at governmental conflicts. But we've had governmental conflicts since I was 14 years old. And every time I thought that would change, I don't think that's going to change. So I have a feeling that's just going to continue on. It's part of what's going to be our future as well. I don't mean to sound negative about it. It's just the reality of it. I don't know what the others feel.
I would agree. I also, and maybe it's just the past few years and witnessing the rise of white supremacy that I'm starting to lose hope in American, ability to not have conflict with anyone. I mean, the United States seems to want to have conflict with every country. So, part of me, I think I approach that question. It's funny, I feel the most American when I'm criticizing this country most vehemently. I don't know. I'll leave it there.
I just want to say it's frustrating because whatever happens in the politics of these two countries towards each other, as an American, there are points, there are places that you feel that you like American government to act somehow to help those who are oppressed in Iran. But the whole thing is so negatively in itself, as a system, is abused because probably no one cares about human rights in Iran. It's just used as an excuse to do whatever political agenda they have. Then you get frustrated because you think, well, you should care about minorities and women. You should do something, should pressure on the Iranian government. But the way things are handled, it's more putting pressure on, children and people who in need of medication, and you do sanctions and embargoes and all that. So it's just confusing and it's frustrating. And maybe that's why we write sometimes about those things.
On those thoughtful words from Omid, I'm afraid our time together is coming to an end, but I want to make a few quick announcements. The first one is that there will be another reading, virtual reading for this anthology. It will take place on May 23rd at 5 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. So if you're interested, please check the chat box because the registration information is there. I also want to remind you to please support the great work of these panelists and the editors by purchasing a copy of the book. And there is also a link to purchase the book in the chat box. And the book is available in both hardcover and in a Kindle edition for those of you who prefer to read that way. And I do want to say one other thing about the book, having had a chance to read it myself in the past few days. I think what you'll find when you read it is you will find so much self-identification in the stories that are there. This is where, as a reader, I think you'll really feel held by this community of writers and understood by this community of writers in a way that no other community will understand you quite in the same way. So I think it will be, for you as readers, a really deep and meaningful experience. I can just say that from my own experience of reading the book, that I felt really profoundly kind of held and cared for by the writers, especially in these COVID times where I'm sheltering on my own and, we're all in this weird situation. So I found that the book at this moment was a really deep and relaxing place to go. So with all of that said, I want to thank everybody, the panelists for participating, the editors for making this book possible, Leila for helping us with tech, and Mandana for organizing us as a panel. Thank you, everybody. It's been a real pleasure. I hope to see you all in real life when these COVID times are over. Thank you so much, and have a good afternoon and evening. Bye, everybody. Bye, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye. Stay safe.
Stay safe.
Thank you.